Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the council meeting of the 28th of July 2020. I start by acknowledging we meet on the lands of the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and sorry, it's been a long day, and acknowledge the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation and pays respects to elders past, present and emerging. Item 2, apologies, members on leave of absence. We do have Councillor Ashley Wallace on leave from the 21st to the 28th of July. And just noting that we are still using our hybrid format. So we do have Councillor Fotakis and Councillor Loden with us via Zoom. So I'll go straight to public question time and receiving of public statements. Welcome members of the public gallery. Good to see you this evening. We'd welcome you to come up to the microphone and speak for up to 3 minutes. We just ask that you state your name and the address where you reside. It's no order, it's just whoever would like to come up first. Oh, and just to be clear, for those who don't attend regularly, Peter, this might be relevant as someone who's not a regular attendee. Peter, just to let you know, we do live stream public question time. If anyone feels uncomfortable with that, please let me know and I will ask for the recording to stop.
Hello.
Good morning. Good afternoon.
Andrew Main, Alfonso Street, North Perth. Yesterday I met with the CEO to discuss my concerns with the lack of and inadequate nature of community consultation that the council sometimes undertakes. Thank you for your time yesterday, CEO. And some of my questions today relate to that meeting. Question 1, for each of the projects I'll list later, can you please advise the following? Was community engagement conducted? If so, when did it occur? Were all residents and ratepayers aware or advised that they could be involved in the consultation process? How were residents and ratepayers notified that a consultation process was occurring? How was this engagement undertaken? For example, written submissions, forums or other? How many people participated in the consultation process? What was the response of council following the feedback received? For example, did the project scope change? And what was the cost of each project? And was consultation done in accordance with the city's community consultation policy? So the projects of interest to me are at Beatty Park Reserve, the demolition of the pavilion, the replacement of bollards, the use of the grass area for car parking, the new landscaping on the demolished pavilion site. At the Leek Street open space site, the replacement of bollards and landscaping at the southern end. Other projects of interest to me, construction of the roundabout at the intersection of Lincoln and Wright Street Highgate, the protected bike lane project on Carr Street, West Perth, construction of protected bike lane Loftus Street, Leederville, construction of shared path at Keith Frame Reserve. Question 2, in relation to Black Spot Road funding in general, how and when are residents and ratepayers of the city involved in the process to determine which project the city seeks funding for? Question 3, in answer to a question I asked at the council meeting on May 19 this year, the city advised that the already overdue consultation for the North Perth traffic calming project would occur this financial year. Given that we are now in a new financial year and this consultation has not taken place, can you please advise when this consultation will occur? Question 4, street tree replacement process. The city's approach to the replacement of street trees appears ad hoc and without reference to a publicly available plan to guide decisions. This can lead to suboptimal outcomes. I note that other councils have developed and endorsed plans which detail the tree species that will be planted on each street within their district. In my opinion, this enables transparency and good decision-making processes. Will the city consider adopting a similar approach? Question 5, Vincent Street bike path. Weeks ago, concrete was removed and gravel put in its place opposite the intersection with Cleaver Street. There are no warning signs and it is dangerous. When will it be repaired? Thank you, that's all.
Thank you, Andrew. Next speaker, please.
I'm Peter Jeffrey, and I am currently the coordinator of the Vincent Writing Centre, but I have had a lifetime in the arts. Having lived most of my life in Vincent and made a man of Vincent, and actually being a member of the original Arts Advisory Board, it is commonly known that I seek to place Vincent in the centre of a hub between Joondalup, Mundaring and Swanbourne, Cottesloe shires and cities or shires that have a supportive commitment to community, culture and the arts. I was recently excited to see that the Arts Advisory Board was being resurrected, and also that the governance of the Loftus Centre, which handled tactfully and powerfully, does have the potential of an arts centre, has now fallen back to Vincent. So it was natural that I applied for the new board, but due to my computer incompetence, I was not successful in being considered. On discovering this, I hoped that possibly I could be co-opted, but I was told that this had already been included in the agenda. I was then further told that the Arts Advisory Board is purely that, and it has no powers other than making suggestions, and that they are filtered through for the council with due consideration, subject to budgetary constraints. I'm asking, can I be made a special case? And I gather that there are many applicants already on your considerations, due to the fact that with my OAM that was awarded for a lifetime in the arts, media and education, and an absolute desire to see Vincent advance considerably in its culture investment. I can advance documentation for your consideration in your private, confidential deliberations about the board that will show that I feel that I met most, if not all, of the criteria for the ranking. So I leave it in your hands, and I hope that is a successful intervention.
Peter, just for the record, would you mind just stating the suburb that you reside in?
Sorry?
Just for the record, we do ask for your name and suburb that you reside in. Would you mind just
definitely.
stating that? Sorry.
Vincent all the way through. I live in Grosvenor Road.
Thank you very much. And did you have something that you wanted to hand in for photocopying?
Yes, I'll handle just what I put here.
Okay.
And then I'll get another form and I will definitely place it for your consideration. And as I say, it should tick all the boxes.
Thank you very much, Peter. Thanks, Maluka. Next speaker, please.
Dudley Meyer, Chatsworth Road, Highgate. First few questions are on the built form policy. Question 1, tables on pages 21, 47, 60 specify lot boundary setbacks for lots that are less than or equal to 14 metres and lots that are greater than or equal to 14 metres. So the question is, what lot boundary setback applies to lots that are exactly 14 metres? Question 2, the local housing objective P1.8.6 on page 33 requires that developments of single houses and group dwellings must demonstrate a capacity to meet a specified sustainability performance standard. The standards shown are the global warming potential and the net fresh water use. Given that the global warming potential standard for single houses and group dwellings is less than 2,250 kilograms CO2 equivalent per occupant per year, how will the city determine at the planning stage how many people will occupy the building and therefore what the total CO2 equivalent may be? Question 3, what physical infrastructure other than the bare minimum required by the National Construction Code will influence CO2 equivalent emissions? Question 4, given that the net freshwater use standard for single houses and group dwellings is less than 57 cubic metres per occupant per year, how will the city determine at the planning stage how many people will occupy a building and therefore what the net freshwater use may be? Question 5, how can the design possibly affect the amount of freshwater consumed per resident? What physical infrastructure as opposed to behaviours impact water usage? Question 6, have all development applications submitted after the 17th of June 2020 been required to demonstrate adherence to P1.8.6? If not, why not? Question 7, given that the policy states that, and I'm quoting, an urban design study is to be submitted with a development application, has the city been requiring all development applications submitted since the 17th of June to include such a document? If not, why not? So I have some other questions. Question 8, the city's code of conduct says, and I'm quoting, in order to ensure the code remains current and relevant, it will be reviewed and presented to council for re-adoption no more than 3 months after each ordinary election. So the question is, why has the administration failed to do this, particularly given that the 3 months expired well before COVID-19 became an issue? Question 9, given that case law and legal advice and the Newbury principles, which states that planning conditions must be imposed for a planning purpose, must be fairly and reasonably relate to a development, and must be reasonable, can the city confirm that all of the recently announced projects funded by the Percent for Art contributions have conformed to the Newbury principles, in particular the free sports broadcasting workshops for footy diehards, the absurdist video game, and the music video / documentary? Question 10, why does the answer to one of my previous questions about the DSR lease say that, and I quote, the administration did not engage an external property consultant to assist the lease discussion, let's finish this, when the payment of $8,800 was made on the 28th of November 2019 to Knight Frank Australia Proprietary Limited for, and I quote, lease negotiation services 246 Vincent Street. Thank you. I assume the 3 minutes is up.
I think the CEO just, okay. We'll just respond on to questions on notice in the report. Unless you did, you could feel free to go ahead.
Through you, Mayor, I just did want to clarify for Mr. Meyer that the changes to the Local Government Act passed last year now include a mandatory code of conduct for all elected members. So that means that council doesn't need to approve its own code of conduct specifically for elected members.
And did you wish to respond to the issue of DSR lease negotiations?
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole. I think we confirmed in the response to the previous question that we did engage external advice for the commencement of the negotiations with the Minister for Works. And that was in the written response to that question that we did engage an external property consultant to conduct the negotiations on our behalf up until a certain point when we then negotiated directly with the department.
Thank you, CEO. There are some responses to previous public questions taken on notice included in the agenda this evening. Item 4, applications for leave of absence. I don't believe that we have any. Is that correct? We have nil. Receiving of deputations, petitions and presentations. We have nil this evening. Item 6, confirmation of minutes. This is for the ordinary meeting of the 16th of June 2020. Could I please have a mover and seconder? Moved Councillor Hallett, seconded Councillor Castle. All those in favour? Thank you. I'm just having to look to the screen as well this evening. So, yep, that's great. Carried. Thank you. Announcements by the presiding member. For me, this evening is really all about the budget. So I'll reserve my comments until we get to that item. And I'll go to item 8, which is declarations of interest.
Through you, Mayor Cole, the declarations of interest are very similar with one exception to those that are in the agenda and declared at the briefing session last Tuesday, which include declarations of impartiality related to item 12.3 on the appointment of elected members and community representatives to the advisory groups. And as detailed in the agenda, those impartiality interests were from Councillor Smith, Councillor Hallett, yourself, Mayor Cole, and Councillor Gondaszewski. Councillor Castle has updated the declaration of impartiality related to item 12.3 on advisory groups to note that it's a financial interest due to Councillor Castle's daughter providing babysitting services for one of the applicants for the advisory groups. And I also declared an interest, Mayor Cole, on that item, noting that I'm a former colleague for one of the applicants for the advisory group, and Councillor Castle has declared a financial interest in relation to item 12.8, proposed transfer of Anzac Cottage to the National Trust, noting that the extent of the interest is that the Friends of Anzac Cottage are a client of Councillor Castle's business. I noted that your declaration of interest in partiality related to the extent of the interest being one of the community nominees being an acquaintance of yours.
Thank you very much, CEO. So before we go to business, so far we have had one item on the agenda raised by Mr. Jeffries, member of the Public Gallery this evening, which is 12.3. So I'll now go around the room to see if councillors wish to pull out further items for debate. Councillor Hallett, Councillor Castle, on noting the budget is an absolute majority decision required and will be debated. Councillor Castle.
11.1, please.
Thank you. Councillor Toppelberg.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. 10.1, 12.1 you have to do, and 12.8, please.
Yes. Thank you. Councillor Smith. Councillor Gontaszewski.
12.4 and 12.9, please.
And we do need to deal with 12.3, but actually, sorry, we've just had that raised by Mr. Jeffries. Okay, just bear with us while we work out which items. Oh, I'm so sorry. Please excuse me. Feel free to shout out at me. Councillor Fotakis, you have been very clear that your hand is in the air, and our deepest apologies.
No, that's okay, Mayor. It was just in relation to the previous matter, which was declarations of interest. I did have my hand in the air. I just wanted to make sure the CEO did add the declarations I forwarded to him this afternoon, which weren't included in the declarations from last week's meeting, which I was an apology for, that related to item 12.3. And I had no items to carry over.
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, my apologies. I did receive a declaration of interest from Councillor Fotakis prior to the meeting in relation to a declaration of impartiality on item 12.3.
Thank you. And Councillor Loden, would you like to raise any other items for discussion?
Yes, 10.2, as I'm sure the director will be pleased to hear. I do have some questions about the confidential items, so I'm wondering if we can raise that at the end if possible.
Sure, so for confidential discussion. Thank you, Councillor Loden. Apologies. CEO will now read out the items to be moved en bloc.
Through you, Mayor Cole, the items being proposed to be moved en bloc include items 10.3, 10.4, 11.2, 11.3, 11.4, 11.5, 12.2, 12.5, 12.6, 12.7, 12.10 and 12.11.
Thank you, CEO. Could I please have a mover and seconder for the en bloc items? Moved Councillor Toppelberg, seconded Councillor Castle. All those in favour? Declare the en bloc items carried. Okay. I'm just considering, do we usually raise items in the order they've been raised first by members of the public gallery, but I suspect that we will have to have a confidential discussion about 12.3. So I think we'll probably hold that over. Would that, CEO, I think if we're going to discuss whether applications were received, etc., would that need to be discussed confidentially or, yeah? Yes, yep. Just checking. Thank you. Okay, so we'll go to 10.1 Waste Strategy Project 2, Bulk Hard Waste Options Appraisal Progress Report. Can I have a mover and seconder, please? Move Councillor Toppelberg. Seconded Councillor Gontaszewski.
Thank you, Mayor. I just, the actual, so the engagement and communication strategy that's proposed reads as comprehensive. I just thought it was probably good timing this week whilst bulk verge collection is being carried out the way it has been for the last 20 years. Whilst that's going on, it's probably a good time to highlight, as I like to do, some of the poor outcomes of the current system. The piles of junk, what's probably of most concern. I've noted a couple of instances where I've sent through information where there's people dumping who are clearly either not from the area or not from the location that they're dumping. But of most concern is to me is the amount of recyclable or salvageable or worthwhile product that, because of the weather we've had the last few days, has been destroyed and that will end up in landfill that through very simple mechanisms available to people these days could quite easily be repurposed or disposed of. So I think that the option of do nothing or continue as it is a non-option in my personal view. I also note that whilst the net was cast quite broadly, that the community panel feedback that has been provided is ultimately a very narrow field of participants. And I think that when this comes back to us and we need to assess it, whilst I went through a comprehensive process, I'm very interested in what the broad communication and consultation strategy delivers back to council, because I think that we have a responsibility to listen to the community on these matters. But from my point of view, that something definitely has to change, because the current methodology and the current options, another anecdote, I bumped into a real estate agent on Sunday who just come from a home open and had someone make comment to them that they felt like they were quote unquote in the Bronx when they came to visit, which obviously doesn't do much for, I know it's unusual timing and we have shortened it down to just the weekend before pickup, which is much better than the 3 to 4 weeks we've seen in previous years. But the idea that in 2021, we'll still see people piling piles of junk and sometimes dangerous goods on their front verges is no longer an acceptable outcome. So hopefully the timeline that's there means we will be able to have a better solution by this time next year.
Councillor Gontaszewski.
Yes, I was the seconder, and I'd just like to wholeheartedly support Councillor Toppelberg's comments. I think that it's been better this year with a shorter presentation time, but there's a huge amount of people out there dumping rubbish, and then also that encourage people to trawl through and make, pretty big mess, and also, yes, the lost opportunity. So I'm looking forward to seeing the outcomes of this consultation and moving forward with this one.
Councillors? Look, I think that what is proposed is a comprehensive approach, and it is about really deep diving on this and talking to people across Vincent. We have in the past experienced very disparate views, some people being incredibly passionate about the survival of the bulk verge collection. I've had a text message from someone wanting to have coffee with me to tell me how amazing it's been for community spirit on their street. Then you have complaints about mess, etc. So very, very strong polarising views in our community. I did have some hesitations about having an external person conduct this engagement at this particular juncture, but I do think that whilst this is a very difficult issue in terms of gauging where the majority of our community sit, because you do hear from those that feel very strongly either way, I think it is important that we do this properly. And I think that until we have our community engagement charter in place, which we really need to get cracking on this financial year, I think this is the best way to get the best consultation on what is a very contentious, heartfelt issue in our community. Are there any further comments? Okay, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? And declare it carried unanimously. Thank you. Okay, item 10.2, we're going to deal with at confidential session. Unless anyone wishes to speak to it in the open session, I'll just see if anyone could indicate No, okay. Then we're moving to community and business services items. So we have 11.1 Draft Youth Action Plan 2020-22, moved by Councillor Castle, seconded by Councillor Gontaszewski.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. Look, I'm really happy to see this item coming forward for consultation. The draft of this plan has been a while coming. It's been a goal of mine for some time to see more targeted planning for our young people and better engagement with them, because they are an age group that is not usually engaged with particularly well or particularly often by local government, and they are a considerable portion of our demographic. So I'm excited to see this opportunity for them to be heard and represented. It's not only pleasing, I think, to see this plan coming forward, but also already an increased involvement from young people through our Vincent Youth Network, which has organised several events and activities. So we're already seeing the beginning of the engagement with this group, and I'm hoping this plan will see even more develop over the next few years. I'm really looking forward to the next phase of consultation, because although there was quite extensive work done to develop this plan, there's also further opportunities to talk with young people and hear their thoughts on this draft, and also gathering feedback from our soon to be reformed Children and Young People Advisory Group, who, because they were quite involved in the early stages of developing this plan. So it'd be good to see that, that project through with them, and really just taking us to a new stage of more integrated engagement and involvement of young people in all of our operations and in our other strategies and plans. So very happy to support this proposal.
Thank you very much, Councillor Castle, and thanks for the championing of youth in Vincent that you do. Councillor Gontaszewski, does anyone else wish to speak to the Youth Action Plan? Okay, I'm just checking. I can't see Councillor Fotakis. Anyone on Zoom wishing to speak? No, okay, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Declare it carried unanimously. Thank you. Okay, we have the big item for this evening, which is 11.6, the adoption of the 2020-21 annual budget. This is an absolute majority decision required. Can I please have a mover and a seconder? Moved Councillor Gontaszewski, seconded Councillor Castle.
Oh, where to begin? Look, I'm sure that there'll be others to speak to this, but this has been a very challenging budget coming right off the back of a COVID-related budget review. I don't believe that our finance team had a chance to draw breath between one and the other. So my thanks are extended to our administration for working so hard throughout this pandemic on a number of fronts, this being one of them. What we have here is a budget that has been complicated by a radical loss in income, a desire to continue with providing employment to our permanent and staff, and a number of requests and requirements from other tiers of government, and that has meant that there was a commitment made by the city not to increase our rates yield. There is the complicating factor of a GRV revaluation on how we communicate and how the requirement to contribute to the rate base is distributed amongst our community. But all that aside, what I wanted to actually talk about with my time here was to just talk about that there's two things I wanted to make sure that I covered with my time. One being that the city has an absolute imperative to increase our investment in our asset renewal, and that is something that we have put some effort into in this budget. We have a ageing pool of building assets, ongoing requirements for road maintenance. we've got a number of projects that we need to put some thinking into in terms of our facilities, such as our stadiums and our sporting grounds. And so part of this budget was, whilst the city was essentially having to contract in order to cope with the assumptions around reduced expenditure, we've also had to ensure that we aren't walking away from our need to improve our allocation towards the renewal of our assets. And so that is something that is within this budget. The other thing that we've seen here is that there is a redistribution, I guess, or a changing of the differential general rate between the commercial and industrial rate and the residential rate, where we now see that the residential rate has a higher cents in the dollar than our commercial industrial. I am supportive of this. I think that this works for us in the long term. We have an in principle decision in relation to commercial waste services, and whilst I'm not going to bind myself to any future decision making, I do believe that what we're looking at here is that it paves the way for us to look at that the rates that we gather from our commercial versus our residential potentially will reflect our level of service provided if we were down the track to look at amending or removing a commercial waste service from the city, and that this then potentially removes the complexity that we've always faced in relation to whether we would at some point down the track impose a waste charge. I'm on the record saying I don't think we need to do that. Don't get your hopes up, Councillor Loden. But it did occur to me today that that's always been one of the complicating factors, and that this potentially smooths the way for that. I'm getting ahead of myself, so I'm going to cease now. But I think that that those two things are perhaps have been part of my consideration of where we're at in this this budget, along with obviously all of our the issues that we, along with government and all of our community, have faced in dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic. I note that there is an amendment in the green and then a number of other amendments on the table. I won't move any to begin with. I will let other people speak.
That's appreciated. Thank you, Councillor Gontaszewska. We'll now go to the seconder.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. Look, I echo a lot of the comments made by Councillor Gontaszewski. As we all know, it's no surprise that it's been a particularly difficult year to set a budget, not only because of the extreme health and financial impact that we've already seen on the community, but also because of the difficulty in predicting and estimating how this is going to unfold over the next 12 months. It's always a balancing act preparing a budget, and particularly so in this case. I think everyone in this room, and I know all of our staff, are driven to do the right thing by our community, and there is a strong need to offer relief wherever we're able to do so. But our responsibility is not only to consider the impact of rates on the individual resident and business owner or landowner, but also to a responsibility to the community as a whole to practice good financial management. And it's finding the balance between those two often competing issues that can be challenging. So that was particularly hard this year. And I think everyone is very aware of the pain and stress that the pandemic has placed on our community and would like to be able to offer endless support. But we've also had additional complications of the GRV revaluation, which has added volatility and some murkiness to the ratings. It does make it harder to both explain and to understand how that has impacted our rating this year. And I have to say that local governments have also not had the benefit of access to a lot of the stimulus funding that has been offered to other organisations. We have not been eligible for JobKeeper, and for the most part, most of the stimulus that's been provided by the state has been targeted at specific projects such as road infrastructure or the offer of low-cost loans, which simply defer the pain. So we have dealt with that with special purpose funds and with a severe contraction of our operations in order to balance the budget and to make some conservative forecasts. But as I said, to add to that, the difficulty in predicting how this pandemic will play out in the next 12 months has made it very hard to estimate how we can manage that financially. Having said all of that, I am, for the most part, comfortable with where we've landed on this budget. And the reason for that is because our projects and planned operations for the coming financial year have been pared back to basics, with only dollars allocated to projects deemed urgent and those that are closely aligned to our strategic community plan. Our commercial rates and the minimal changes there reflect our efforts to support local business as they enter the recovery phase. And while there is some pain for residents who will see a rate increase, some of this can be attributed to property improvements since the last valuation. And I think this is something that council spent a lot of time determining how to address what might be a rate increase for residents. And the decision, in my mind, was made to target hardship rather than to spread that reduction across the entire community. And the reasoning for that, I know for me, is so that relief is going where it's needed the most and not necessarily in situations where it's perhaps not as crucial. So that brings me to one issue that I do, or there are two, but one issue that I do have with what's proposed, and that is in relation to the hardship provisions. I do have an amendment, but I'm very happy to let other people speak first before moving. It might be an idea that for those who want to speak before we get to amendments, I might just give them the opportunity and then we can go to the amendments. Are you happy with that approach? Okay. Would anyone like to speak to the substantive motion? Councillor Toppelberg.
Thank you, Mayor. Few comments. So that the opportunity to directly address the submissions that were received is limited, given certainly in a public forum, whilst they weren't what they were received, read and understood. And I think that there's some comments that are relevant to. There was, I think, some really important points brought up and some really distinctive points of view. One of the things that is always a struggle is that whilst the GRV, which is the gross rental value, is provided across the state as a mechanism for calculating the raising of rates revenue, the simple maths is, and the analogy I use is that the value of what somebody could lease their property for in a residential or commercial context does not relate to the cost of paying somebody to lay asphalt on a road or to mow the lawn in a park or otherwise. So the real cost of local government are not necessarily dependent on the value of properties, but the value of properties and their rental value is the mechanism which is afforded to us by the state in order to be able to raise rates or to raise rates revenue. Couple of interesting statistics that were pointed out. So the last time that the GRV went the other way to the extreme, which was a 29% increase, there was a 17% decrease in the rate in the dollar for residential properties. So somewhat commensurate with what's currently being considered in the reverse. And I think that that's important to note, that local government doesn't seek to gouge in the good years or to unfairly raise revenue when the opportunity is presented in either the good or the bad years. But ultimately, what we're dealing with, the same as many or most households and businesses in the current climate, we're looking at a forecast $10 million hole out of a roughly $50 million annual budget. And like any organisation or any entity, whether it be a household or a corporate or a government, facing a 20% decrease in the volume of funds that are available to you to what would otherwise be considered normal, decisions have to be made, and you land on certain things that are considered essential and others that are considered optional, and people will have different views on that. And I think that broadly, where the budget sits, it represents a fair representation of what the community of Vincent expects, and also that prudent financial management, and particularly the asset management, which has been at the forefront of discussion for the last couple of years. What that asset management means, and I know Mr. Gardam is here in in the gallery this evening is things like where we have buildings where we are seeking to lease them, and the buildings are approaching 70 years of age, and the fire compliance in our own building does not pass or it does not meet the current fire regulations. We have obligations to be able to invest in those buildings to provide that as a basic necessity. Those sorts of things have been neglected in favour of other activities of local government over the years, and I think that it's incumbent upon us to, as we properly assess that and look at what our capability is, to address those on an as needed basis. But that's something that is going to be a multi-year process, not something that we're seeking to spring on the community in 2020-21, but certainly will be a feature of how we do business over the coming years. I will make a comment about the operational expenditure, and in particular in relation to marketing. There's been discussion over a number of years, and I think that when we see the dollars that are associated with it, and if you look at the line of questioning sometimes that comes from the chamber in terms of activities that take place that aren't either presented to council or that sometimes of a surprise, and things like having to ask, why was this being done, or how was this being benefiting the strategic goal of council? If you look at the dollar spend over the last 10 years, whilst it's often tied in amongst a lot of operational areas, and it's hard to actually get a figure, I think that the volume of dollars and human resources that we have in that in marketing at Vincent is quite hefty, considering our size as a local government and what our obligations are, and what the obligations are in terms of our communication side, probably more so than marketing under the Act. And I think that certainly is something I know that CEOs published these KPIs, and the need to have a marketing plan for Vincent. I think that needs to also look not only at the what do we do and why do we do it, but how do we fund it, and what is the appropriate level of funding to be able to achieve the goals. And for me personally, it's probably sitting on the heavy side at the moment in terms of where those numbers are. Not enough to seek to vote against what's presented as a budget, but that's an area that I wanted to highlight as something that I do think the questions have been asked over a long period of time, and it is time that we understand what our broad view is of our obligations as a government in terms of our marketing and communications.
Thank you. Does anyone wish to speak to the substantive motion? Look, I will speak to it, and I'm trying not to be repetitive, but I really do feel there's certain comments that must be said by me on this budget, because this has been, in my experience in 6 years of Vincent, our most difficult budget, and I believe it's probably the most difficult budget in Vincent's history. I was here in 2014 for the $4 million budget black hole, which resulted from a transposition error on a budget paper. That was very challenging at the time, but this is something else altogether. And I think that we really have spent a lot of time grappling with how we deal with this budget. We are dealing with an incredibly tough economic landscape, despite the fact that I think Western Australia is probably the envy of the world in terms of our public health response. The impact on our community, businesses and life in Vincent has been evident all around us. We have seen many businesses close, some have not reopened. We've seen vacancies emerge. We all have friends and neighbours in the community that we know have lost job, had hours reduced, had a period of unemployment, and that has been incredibly difficult to see. We are dealing with compounding losses of revenue. We're trying to deal with that through, we're talking about a forecast of $10 million, and we have wound back expenditure by 6.8 million. But we also, as Councillor Castle and Councillor Gondaszewski have alluded to, we also have to look at our financial long-term health and sustainability for the sake of our community and the future. We have had some pretty tough expectations set upon us, particularly by the state government, where we have been asked to keep staff, to spend on capital works to stimulate the economy, to use our reserves, to take loans if we need to, and to reduce interest. Some of these things have been mandated. We have been asked to execute a rates freeze. At the time that discussion was happening, we were hopeful that the GRV review would be postponed. That didn't happen, and that has added complexity and has been quite difficult. We haven't been eligible for JobSeeker for our Beatty Park casuals because we are a local government. We are running a, sorry, did I say seeker? Sorry, JobKeeper. My apologies. Although it is running a business, we haven't been eligible, and that did have implications for our casual workforce, which is very difficult. But we have, I think, in the Vincent way, been innovative in the way that we've approached this. I think that our governance model that was set up to deal with COVID-19 has been something that other local governments now have looked to as a good model. We have been very creative in a very principled way about how we've used our purpose-specific reserves. So reserves like Percent for Art, our developer contributions, has gone to art relief. And we know as soon as events were cancelled and projects were cancelled, they were on the front line, as were our businesses. So that arts relief has been important to keep our local arts community going, and also to help our economic rebound as we try to inject some vibrancy back into our town centres, because we will see an explosion of public art form coming soon as a result of those art relief grants. We have, for the first time, unlocked the Leederville Gardens Trust Fund, a trust fund that can only go to public benevolent institutions. And we have used that in a time of need. And we have funded some amazing charitable organisations. Yesterday, I went to Food Bank and talked to them about what they're doing and what the need is, and how in March their shelves were bare. And that food security is an issue that affects 47% of people who are employed that are coming to Food Bank to collect food from them. So I feel incredibly privileged to be able to use those Leederville Trust funds to support organisations like Food Bank, to support women and children escaping domestic violence during COVID-19, to support youth and mental health issues, to support homelessness, to support pensioners. These are $1 million worth of funds that will go to Vincent residents. We have also, for the first time, had some pretty strong measures on relief. For quite a few years, Vincent councillors have been talking about whether we could introduce direct debit payments more frequently than our 4 instalment options. And this year we are able to roll out rate smoothing, where any ratepayer doesn't, if you're not in financial hardship, it doesn't matter, you can still use rate smoothing. You can pay weekly, fortnightly or monthly. I think that's a simple thing, but I think it will be very well received in our community. We are also talking tonight about a $250,000 hardship fund to support those who really need it. We are going to have a focus on economic stimulus through capital works, and most of that is focused on renewing our ageing community facilities. That's something really important that we have to confront. Beatty Park looks set to receive $2.9 million. And that is really about dealing with tiles that are currently at risk of delaminating from the indoor pool, dealing with change rooms that haven't had an upgrade on the north for many years, fixing power circuits in the grandstand, which we really need to do for safety reasons. So this is critical works. And the added benefit is that we hope that will help the local economy. So a lot of work going around restoring and keeping our community hubs going. Economic rebound is also a big one. We have an economic rebound round table set up with our town teams, and we're going to be developing a plan with short-term actions to put into place this year. That's also being helped by spending our cash in lieu for car parking on parking infrastructure around town and better access in our town centres. It is really important that we will be reviewing this budget every quarter. I think that that's a very important part of this budget. We know that's necessary because we don't know what will happen this year. We have forecast with a pessimistic outcome around revenue. We look at what's happening in Melbourne. We don't know whether the High Court challenge and opening of borders, etc., will have an impact. So there is uncertainty, and we need to be prepared for that. And we need to be able to address community need as it changes during what is a pretty difficult time to predict. We are, I think, once this budget is adopted, the intention this year is to have a really strong ongoing conversation with our community about asset sustainability and how we get on top of that as a longer term way to deal with our sustainable vision going forward, in terms of how we deal with really is quite an abundance of ageing assets in our community, which is very difficult to know how we can afford going forward. And I think we also do, picking up on the comments from Councillor Topperberg, need to really drill down on our operational efficiency. So I wanted to say an enormous thank you to Virginia, Venetia, Renelle, Narav and Kin from the finance team. This has been something where I don't think there's been an opportunity to stop. Venetia will know we were developing the 2021 budget. We were had that underway, and then COVID came along and took the rug from under us. And I think the response from the finance team has been outstanding. And also just want to compliment the team on their positivity. And I just can't, understand how tired you must be. And I hope that you've all got a holiday planned to make up for the time that you've put into this budget. So enormous thank you to the team. Thank you to the CEO. Much appreciated to get us to this point. That's it until we start talking amendments. Does anyone else, Councillor Fotakis, do you wish to speak?
Thank you, Mayor. I did have my hand in the air, but I thought, no, I'll wait patiently. I just wanted to reiterate a couple of points that fellow councillors raised. And this is my third budget, and it never gets any easier. But this one was particularly tough. So, and I think your words, Mayor, really touched on the difficulty. It was a process that we started really early, pre-COVID, and then, like you said, the rug was sort of pulled out from underneath us. I think we thought we were all so smart getting in and starting so early, but I think in many ways, thank goodness we did, because we had some pretty tough issues that COVID aside that we've had to address. And Councillor Gontaszewski touched on those long-term legacy issues with our ageing major assets like Beatty Park. I did want to just go back to maintaining that a great deal of our focus has been on dealing with the widespread financial hardship and our recovery post-COVID, and rightfully so. And a lot of those programs that Mayor actually touched on were really quick to be implemented. The COVID Relief Committee, we're really quick to get that underway and to unlock those reserve funds. We don't have, not like a lot of other councils that have huge reserves at hand. So what reserves that we did have, I was really glad to support such a quick releasing. Those funds come with a whole range of conditions, so they're not just to be widespread. And I think the community, in the most part, really understands really the great deal of thought and consideration that had to go into how those particular funds would be applied. Tonight we're considering some additional hardship measures, and Mayor, you touched on those ability to really minimise and break down your payments into smaller issues, and that's not to be underestimated, the power that can help in alleviating that stress of having to meet big bills and being able to break them down into bite-sized pieces. But that comes at a cost to a council, and one that I'm glad to support. But as a measure, when you're looking at costs to actually bring these measures into play, not to be underestimated that these actually have, somewhat some administrative and costs associated with them. I did touch on major assets like Beatty Park. So we not only got those major sort of like capital expenditure going into the park, which is just seems to be this rolling amount of money that's invested into this ageing asset. But we took a huge hit with the closure of Beatty Park, which when you look at the budget, you can really see how reliant that we are as a city to the income that asset draws. So it's not only going to incur not just 2.9 million this year, but I think in future years quite considerable spending. But that sort of adds to my concern about when you actually hear of proposed new swimming pools being built within the CBD, there are some concerns that as a city we need to bear those in mind if we've got future new assets competing with our ageing assets and additional investments that we might need to actually place into that to make sure that we're competitive and remain competitive in the marketplace. I think for those members of the community that maybe think that this is a simple number crunching exercise, I can assure you that it's not. And for me, having worked with most of this team for some time now, there is deep concern about the impact that the budget will have on our residents, on our businesses, and on our community, not just today, but moving forward. And the impact that going through a pandemic like we've had to be able to pull ourselves through and maintain those the essence of really what people love about living in Vincent. So we just don't want us to go to being that council. I don't think the majority of our community wants us to be a council that only deals with roads, rates and rubbish. It's all of those additional programs, I think, which really help sort of embed that uniqueness of why people love living in Vincent. And we saw a lot of that come out during COVID, that sense of community and that community binding that we had. While I know we've got an amendment coming through, I will touch on it now, and it saves me sort of having to speak to it in the future. There's a lot of discussion recently around budget deficits and budget surpluses, albeit on the federal stage and the bigger federal stage. But I think a budget deficit
Councillor Fotakis, are you happy to hold just because we should address the amendment if the amendment is moved and seconded?
I will do that. I just wanted to save moving through that because that was just going to be just one sentence, but that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillors, any further comments on the substantive motion? Okay, the floor is open for amendments. Councillor Gontaszewski.
One of how many? Okay. May I please move the amendment here that is on the blue?
Is there a seconder for the amendment on the blue? Moved by Councillor, seconded by Councillor Castle.
Thank you. This is just an amendment to improve the alignment between the recommendation in the budget and the financials in the statutory budget presented. Within the budget papers, the rates waiver that the city applies to sporting clubs and some other organisations in the city was listed as $140,000. However, the recommendation that sets out the listing sets it out as $127,220, and so the recommendation is that recommendation 1.3 be amended so that the rate setting statement by program showing an amount required to be raised from rates of $35,913,642. So that's the new amount, and the proposed financial statements be updated accordingly.
Thank you, Councillor Gontaszewski. Councillor Castle, do you wish to speak to it? Does anyone wish to speak to this amendment? Okay, I'll put it. All those in favour? I declare the amendment carried unanimously.
I've got others. I'll just see if anyone else is.
I'll move the amendment on the green.
Okay, we have an amendment on the green that has been moved. Is there a seconder? Seconded, Councillor Gontaszewski.
As I said in my earlier comments, at some point you have to take a position on some of these things, and you can comfortably argue in a number of different ways. It's relatively self-explanatory, but the intent of the amendment is to reduce the rates in the dollar burden on residential, and it adjusts the deficit accordingly. So effectively, the city is covering that cost. The mayor has put forth, and there's quite lengthy explanation from her point of view. I'll let her speak as well. There is no right of reply on an amendment, so I'm happy to leave my comments at that. But I will say that what leads me to support this proposal is also that from a government point of view, more broadly, that whilst there's been some relief provided in terms of essential services, so water, electricity, etc., most of the stimulus that has been offered and the assistance that's been offered in a government sense from state and federal level has been targeted towards business, and that flows through to individuals with some, with retaining employment and employment opportunities. But I think that without this, we perhaps had fallen just a little bit on the side of favouring of taking that burden from commercial, but putting it all on residential. I think that this arrests some of that and brings it back to the city, and it's in a fair and equitable manner. So I'm happy to support it.
Councillor Gontszewski.
I'm supportive too. I think that this has been an incredibly dynamic time. When we started to set our budget assumptions, it was earlier in the pandemic, a week feels like a year at the moment. So, businesses were closing their doors, and I think that our hearts, were definitely going out to all of our community, but it did appear that, at that stage we were looking at our budget assumptions, that there was limited supports in place for business, that, that they were being essentially told, you must close, and so since then, there've been a range of measures to be implemented. But what has also become clear is that this is a long-term budgetary issue for our community, for our households, for our business. And I think that this is a fairer approach. I recognise that I've already spoken tonight about the need to work on our assets, and that doing this creates a problem in our long-term financial plan that is compounded every year. That said, I think we just need to, I'm going to be really crass. No, I'm not going to be really crass. I just think we need to deal with it. That's a better phrase. And we just need to focus on being fair. And I think that this amendment goes some way to that, whilst still ensuring that there is a difference between residential and commercial rates that would support a change in waste service provision in the future.
Councillor Castle.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, I'm also supportive of this amendment. I think to extend what Councillor Gontaszewski was just saying is that I feel that we were putting this budget together in an already different circumstance to what we find ourselves in now, and that was based on a worst case scenario. So we do have to be conservative, and we don't know what's around the corner, but I feel that Council will have an opportunity to review and to soften our budget over the next 12 months. However, we only get one opportunity to rate our ratepayers, and by projecting this budget on that worst case scenario, we are locking ratepayers into that particular model. So I do see this this amendment as a way to offset that somewhat. I'm also, while I'm nervous about going into deficit on this budget, we have seen that happen at all levels of government, or certainly at the federal level recently. And I do believe that we'll have a good chance of clawing this back through our review process, either by an improved revenue position, which is quite possible, or deferring projects that are currently on the list for completion this year. And if need be, we also do still have the offer of low interest loans from the state government. So I am comfortable with us going into deficit in order to offer some relief to the residential rate.
Thank you. I just wanted to point out, I'm not speaking to it, I just wanted to point out that I did receive late advice this afternoon that the basis on which the amendment was prepared, I believe, was a 26%. That I just want to make sure you've all seen the graph at the back, and that what we're dealing with is that it would reduce residents receiving an increase from 37% to 30%. On Friday, I was advised that would be 37% to 26%. So I just wanted to make sure that you'd read that advice. Councillors? Councillor Loden.
Thank you, Mayor. I just had a couple of questions through you. What would be the total dollar value reduction in rates for residents on the median rate and the minimum rate as a result of this amendment?
Yes, sorry, I didn't get that again.
What would be the total dollar value reduction in rates for residents on the median rate and the minimum rate?
We don't have that on, I don't have that offhand, yeah, Councillor Loden. I'm looking at the,
The CEO may be able to
yeah,
respond.
it's $21. The minimum rates remain the same at 1211. The minimum will remain the same as 1211, but yes, it'll be $21.
So the roughly 30% of people on the minimum rate won't see a benefit out of this, is that correct?
Yes.
And what's the maximum reduction someone can obtain through the hardship provisions?
$250.
And what would be the total impact on the long-term financial plan over the next 10 years from this amendment, assuming no subsequent increase in rates to plug this gap in the next financial year?
So we worked on the LTFP and it's looking at 3.4 million. The compounding impact of this, of the 291,000 has a compounding impact on the LTFP, and the result is 3.4 million.
And if council was instead to provide this funds as additional funds under the hardship provisions, either by increasing the number of people who can access it or increasing the dollar value that people can obtain through the hardship funds, what impact would that have on the long-term financial plan?
That will have a once-off impact of 291,000 in the 2021 financial year. So it'll be a once-off impact as compared to the current proposal, which will have a compounding impact.
And how will this impact, this is a difficult question to answer obviously, but how would this impact the ability of the city to deliver on our asset sustainability and our strategic community plan?
Obviously with the 3.4 million anticipated reduction in revenue over a 10-year period, that is what we'll be seeing in a reduction in investment in the SCP and in the CBP going forward.
Thank you. So I guess from my perspective, I can't support this amendment. If the city is if city and council are seeking to relieve the hardship of COVID and the recent events, then I think those funds should go into the hardship measures we've introduced. $250 is going to make a significant difference to people. Increasing it to $500 is going to make a more significant difference to people. Reducing your rates by $21 from a rates bill of $1,200 is not going to be the thing that makes a difference for somebody in this situation. We've effectively spread that out across everybody. I recognise that a lot of people are struggling in COVID. As a result of what's happened, people have lost their jobs, people's businesses are struggling, but the reality is there's also people that haven't been as impacted by COVID and are capable of managing to meet their rates obligations as well. So I won't be supporting the amendment. If there was an amendment to look at providing additional funds into the hardship provisions, that would be something I could consider supporting. But the impact on the long-term financial plan, our ability to deliver on a strategic community plan over that time as well, I think is too significant to have $3.4 million taken out of it when we're already struggling significantly to meet our asset sustainability measures. We have an audit finding around that. Recognise other people have a different view. We don't have an approved long-term financial plan at this point in time, so we're going on what we've seen in the past and the discussions we've had to date. But from where I sit, I don't support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Loden. Councillors, perhaps I'll speak to it. I think the bottom line is someone has to pay So whilst it might be a compounding impact in our long-term financial plan, equally a 1.8% increase in the rate in the dollar will compound year on year for residents who are paying that additional increase. So it's a choice. And I think that I'm coming at this from a very strong point of principle, and that is that if the City of Vincent Council decides to fix the rate in the dollar for commercial businesses and that the additional cost to residents of wearing that is 1.8% increase in the rate in the dollar from 17 to 18.9, I don't believe that that is a fair way to apply the GRV revaluation. I think that when we looked at applying the rate in the dollar revaluation across all categories, residents were due to receive a 17% increase in the rate in the dollar. But because we made the decision to stabilise that an increase, so there's no increase for our commercial ratepayers, the decision was made to flow that over. And I think if we make that decision, we have to fund it. The compounding impact on the long-term financial plan, I completely accept that. I haven't put this forward without considering that. I've given that a lot of consideration. This has been a very difficult decision-making process just generally. But I think that in terms of addressing our long-term financial plan, we need to go a lot further than what we're currently looking at in a draft long-term financial plan. And I'm seeking for that to happen this financial year as we move through issues like asset sustainability, operational efficiency, looking at our capacity to be financially sustainable for the future. This is at the heart of what I'm hoping our council can start to achieve. But I come back to the principle of making a decision to freeze rates for commercial, and that 1.8% is then borne by residents. And I just don't think that's a principled position to adopt. I think that we need to decide to pay for that. The CEO has provided me with a document that I think is this in draft form? It's a WELGA document that has been looking at they've been going to the Commonwealth Treasury JobKeeper recipient data and have been looking at how individual local governments have been impacted. And it shows that the proportion of all businesses accessing JobKeeper payments by location in Vincent, 53.5%, compared to the Perth metropolitan area of 35.3%. So we can see that our local businesses have been impacted more, and because of the nature of the businesses that are in Vincent, things like food and beverage, than we have seen across the metropolitan area. So I think that we are on the right track in softening that impact for our commercial ratepayers. I think that was the right decision to make. But what I'm really putting to council is that if we decide that, and I think that is the right decision to make, we should fund it from within our budget. That's the principle. So I was a little disappointed to receive advice late this afternoon that wasn't a 26% versus 37%, but that it is 30%. But the principle remains, and I feel that if this is adopted, I can look residents in the eye and say, this is how GRV works. 6 years ago, when you saw I'm looking for the figure, the 29% increase in the rate in the dollar, we brought that down by 17%. We are now seeking to raise it by 17% because we can't operate our business based on what's happening to the GRV, because our services cost the same. We've had the compounding impact of our revenue reduction, and we're seeking to deal with that through cutting our expenditure and winding back, and we are putting hardship towards this. I would like to see what happens at Q1, Q2, Q3 review in terms of what that need looks like and if $250,000 is enough. We don't know that yet, but as Councillor Castle has talked about, we have one opportunity to set rates, one opportunity to correspond, communicate, address residential concerns about where we've landed and why. We don't have another chance at this. So I am seeking your support for this amendment because I personally feel that I'll be able to have that discussion with residents. It's still going to be tough. There'll still be people in the community that say, why didn't you roll on the rate in the dollar revaluation to us? But I feel that this allows me to have that conversation and to have that real principle behind it. Is there anyone that wishes to speak to the amendment that hasn't already spoken? Okay, I'll put the amendment. All those in favour? All those against? Councillor Loden voting against. I declare the amendment carried. Are there any further amendments on the table? Councillor Gontaszewski. Oh, sorry, apologies. Councillor Castle, your turn.
Well, I did think my amendment might flow quite neatly from Councillor Loden's comments. So I would like to move the amendment on the dark yellow, the saffron maybe.
Mustard.
Is there a seconder for the gold? Councillor Gontaszewski. Councillor Loden will be happy to know that here's one I prepared earlier. He asked for an amendment addressing the financial hardship guidelines. So the proposed amendment is that the recommendation be amended as follows. Clause 7 approves the financial hardship guidelines included in attachment 5 subject to the proposed rates waiver being changed from $250 to $500. So the purpose of this amendment is really to try and target that hardship relief in a more meaningful way. This is not proposing to amend the total amount that's available for hardship at this point, but noting that we have already flagged that there may be a need to increase that bucket of money available if necessary. But my opinion on this is that for someone who has been through the guidelines and the processes that we've set out in our financial hardship guidelines, for them to have satisfied all of those steps, they have proven that they are in severe financial distress, and that $250 reduction on a upwards of $1,200 bill is not going to have a meaningful impact and actually provide the relief that we're seeking to do through this this particular measure, and that $500 is a much more meaningful relief package to offer. I'd note that it is referred to as a cap, so there may of course be situations where not the entire amount is not offered, but this at least gives us more flexibility to really put a dent in that bill that's owed for people who are in quite severe distress. The steps that are required to go through include investigating payment plan options and actually a period of up to 6 months where they have not been able to satisfy those requirements. So I don't think we're going to have much data to review this at our first quarterly budget review or even our second, and that actually we're probably not going to be dealing with a number of these applications until the latter half of the financial year. By which point there's less opportunity to actually address the issue. So I guess what it boils down to for me is, can we help less people more meaningfully as opposed to more people less meaningfully? So 1,000 people at $250 or 500 people at $500. So I'll seek your support in this amendment. Thank you. I'll go to the seconder.
I just had a question in relation to what's proposed in terms of should this be. There's no, I mean, no, I'm really supportive of this. You've absolutely convinced me, Councillor Castle. I think that if we take someone all through this process, and I think the idea is that we have a thorough process because, you know, what we're saying to people is, look, here are the options and we're going to support you through this process. That if we do get to that point at the end of that process, that if, you know, we really should be able to say, well, look, this is where you can access assistance as a Vincent resident to pay a bill, or, you know, potentially this is where you can access, you know, food through food bank or medical assistance, etc. And we've got some of those measures in place, but, you know, if people genuinely accessing those services, if they're seeking financial guidance and they're still unable to pay their rates, I think that this having a meaningful amount, a capped meaningful amount that I suspect by the end of the process won't be utilised in its entirety is better, and we can review as we go forward. We don't have huge stashes of cash to allocate to these sorts of things the way that perhaps some other local governments might do. And so I think that having a meaningful hardship policy is something that we can do. And I mean, this has been a reasonable amount of work to get to this point. And so I do thank administration for their consideration of this, and to Mayor Cole for championing hardship provisions in this budget. So supportive.
Thank you, Councillor Gontaszewski. Are there any further comments on this amendment? I'd just like to say that that was incredibly eloquently put by the both of you, very convincing, and I do support it. Okay, I'll put the amendment. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Are there any other further amendments? Councillor Gontaszewski.
I'd like to put forward the amendment in the buff cream. Beige, ecru. Yes, if I can get a seconder.
I'll go to Councillor Toppelberg. Oh, hang on. Can I just check over on, I just need to check over with Councillor Fotakis and Councillor Loden. Have you been seeking to move or second any items? Just checking in. No hands in the air. I'll go to Councillor Toppelberg as a seconder.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. We've had a number of budget workshops with administration and council in the past 6 months. Whilst not decision-making forums, this is an opportunity for administration and elected members to discuss the preparation of the budget and for council to provide some high-level strategic advice through this process. And also for administration to check in on the assumptions under which they are preparing the budget. This proposed amendment relates to solar photovoltaic panel installation. It relates to proposed installation at Perth Soccer Club to the value of $29,900 that is included in the Capital Works program in the budget as presented. I've been quite clear every time this has been raised with me that I will support ongoing investment in new assets in relation to solar, where the City of Vincent is also the recipient of the financial savings that come with the installation of solar panels, i.e. these need to be on buildings where we're currently paying the power bills. That's not necessarily a position that I'm going to hold to beyond this financial year, but I think given the constraints that we're in, I think that investment in solar should be limited to sites where we get that dual benefit. It is also my understanding, despite some murkiness in relation to this early on, that this does not relate to a grant funding and that grant funding opportunities are yet to be explored. There was also in the briefing notes in relation to my questions on this item, a talk in relation to the potential provision of a loan. I asked some questions in relation to whether the city has a history of providing loans of this nature and on what terms this would be proposed, and I have not received satisfactory answers to either of those questions, which lead me to believe that we haven't and we don't know. So I think that I just want to be clear that this is in relation to me maintaining a consistent position that has been expressed throughout this year, and also me being unable to obtain answers to questions that I've asked in a number of forums. And so I will recommend that we change the Capital Works program for this year so that the solar PV panel system installation at Perth Soccer Club is removed, noting that we can review once we've explored grant funding opportunities and developed a position going forwards in relation to solar panel installation on sites where the city is not the recipient of the savings to electricity costs.
I'll go to the seconder.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. So the principle of a landlord co-funding or investing together with a tenant, and particularly a long-term tenant, for their benefit or for the mutual benefit in solar PV is there are entire commercial entities that exist on that basis these days and that trade-off. But I agree with Councillor Gontaszewski to the extent that the advice that was provided, which is that the project is zero cost to the city because the funds required are proposed to be paid back via a loan to the club. I think that there's opportunity to explore that as a potential funding source in the same way as any grant would be. But I think at this point, I'm comfortable removing it, but also note that the club up until this point was of the view that it was going to happen this year, and would suggest that if there is a financial model that can explain that shared benefit, it doesn't need to be 100% one way or the other, but that shared benefit under a loan structure, it's a reasonable path forward. But I'd like to see that, and maybe just note, we'd like to see that come forward. It can come forward at budget review time or otherwise, but I'm assuming once the club is informed, should this amendment be successful, they'd be seeking avenues because there's a long-term benefit to them, obviously, in that reduced cost. But perhaps if a business model for this and like properties was presented, and we could just have a simple program where we force people to go down the path of seeking external funding. If that external funding is not available, there's a loans process via us as the landlord and owner of the facility, but we can then share that benefit over the time that that the occupant is a tenant. But that ultimately the key principle would be that we would be no worse off financially at the point where that lease comes to an end as well.
Councillors. Councillor Loden.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to clarify the intent of these funds were going to be a donation effectively for the installation of the solar panel system, or it was to be a loan that was paid back over 3 years.
Through you, Mayor Cole, the proposal was that it would be a loan to be paid back over 3 to 5 years. So we had initial discussions with the Perth Soccer Club about a loan of that period. We haven't gone back to them to clarify if it would be in a shorter, say 3-year term, but that was going to be the next step if council approved the funds at the meeting tonight.
So the difference between us installing solar panels on our own facilities and getting paid back via the reduction in our electricity bills, or getting paid back effectively via interest on the loans, is there a difference between those two things for the city?
Through you, Mayor Cole, it will be the interest only, otherwise it will mean nothing else. What we need to note is that the loan is not to be included in the financials at the moment, but yeah, if we go ahead, it will be included in the budget review.
Sorry, that's the sound of my brain thinking. So it's not included in the budget, or it's not included. It's not included in the forward plan of the budget.
The self-supporting loan, the income is not included in the budget. So yeah, that's what I.
Can I ask a question through you, Mayor Cole?
I'm just Councillor Hallett's next, but I'm just wanting to first check that Councillor Loden has concluded.
I might not have concluded, but I need to think a bit.
So you've just asked questions at this point and you'd like to reserve your right. Okay, I'll go to Councillor Hallett and then I'll come back to you.
Thank you, Mr. the Mayor. Can I just confirm that no funding, external grant funding has been reviewed yet, particularly in light of recent state government initiatives?
Through you, Mayor Cole, the club and our community partnerships team has looked into some grants, but they haven't been successful and we haven't applied for any at this stage. So I think it was just initial discussions to see if any grants were available, but nothing's been, there's been no progress basically. So, and no grant funding has been secured.
Did you just say that we haven't applied though either?
Through you, Mayor Cole, my understanding is we haven't applied. It didn't seem like any grants were suitable. So we made investigations but haven't formally applied.
Councillor Toppelberg, you had a question?
I did, just for clarity through you to the Are you the acting executive director this evening? To Phoenicia, how about that?
Yes.
Thank you. Just for clarity, if this amendment is not successful, we would be, and the budget was adopted as it is, we are obliged to undertake the capital works at the cost of $29,900. And there is no documentation or there's no loan drawn up or otherwise, the income side of it. And there was some discussion about interest, which I have no idea of what those percentages or otherwise are. So given that those vagaries, would you, and the administration comment neither supports nor doesn't support what's proposed as the amendment, would administration prefer that this be dealt with at budget review time when we've had a chance to discuss with the club the potential for a loan, interest or other arrangement? Would that be administration's advice at this point?
Yes, we'll be supportive of that. Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, we'll be supportive of that, because then we can discuss that with the club and see if they, and what sort of terms we can give the loan, and all of those negotiations can be resolved.
Councillor Gonchevsky, question?
Yes, just questions. The first time I learned about this proposed loan was in the briefing notes last week. Up until this point in time in the draft budget and also in the draft capital works program in the corporate business plan that includes solar installation on a number of other City Vincent businesses, organisations that have tenants that are non-government organisations or sporting clubs. Were those papers and that CBP drawn up on the basis of this loan idea, or is this something that's just seemed to come to the surface in the last couple of weeks?
Through Mayor Cole, my understanding is that because there's an overwhelming financial benefit for the club, when we were discussing this with them, the fact that they would be able to essentially save money over the course of the rest of their lease terms, that it'd be in their benefit to pay off the cost of installation of the solar panels over a number of years. So that's a new discussion. It's not something we've been having with other clubs. We don't have a formal policy around it, but it's something that the club would certainly be willing to entertain, and it's to their advantage to do so.
So is the answer it's something that's just in the last week or so that's come about? Because I don't think you'd answered my question.
Through you, Mayor Cole, self-supporting loans is a common practice amongst local government, but yeah, it's not been practiced in the City of Vincent. And as the CEO was saying, we were trying to see how we could give the benefit to the club, because the rate of return on this project was pretty high, and therefore, yeah, that idea came up recently.
Thank you.
Councillors, Councillor Loden.
Just to follow on from Councillor Gonchevsky's question. So we've met with the club and discussed the idea of a loan and they're supportive, or that conversation that's been an internal conversation that we've been having about the idea of a loan?
Through you, Mayor Cole, we initially discussed the grant funding proposal with the club, and then when it looked like that wouldn't be successful, then the loan was flagged as another option, but we haven't finalised details of the loan payback period or the interest rate to be charged. So it was more a suggestion, and as the CEO said, the club is very keen because it reduces their costs and there's significant environmental benefit in proceeding with this. So they were happy to look at loaning the money from us and paying back over 3 to 5 year period.
I'll speak to it. This is an interesting one. I'm supportive of funding the club in this regard, if it's under a loan, because that is there's a business case around that. There's a cost neutral business case for the city. We don't lose money in the deal. With that money basically comes back to us with interest attached to it. If that's the way this is structured, which it sounds like that's the conversation that we have, and that's the intent of council. If we don't provide this money now, then it will take longer for this to happen. We then have to get through a mid-year budget review that requires $271,000 dollars to be cut out of it. So I'm not confident we'd be able to add this back in at that point in time anyway. And as council knows, we are in a state of climate emergency. And so we should be acting with haste in these initiatives. So I won't be supporting the proposed amendment.
Councillors? Councillor Fotakis, did you have your hand in the air?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I just want to question, I'm just trying to get my head around the idea of a loan being flagged without us having a process or a policy in place. So through you, Mayor, I mean, maybe it's to the CEOs just to really get some understanding about what the proper process would be in this regard when we are understanding other local governments are obviously doing this, but what we need to really be able to satisfy before we start sort of throwing around the option of loans without having a proper process or a policy in place.
Through you, Mayor Cole, if this option was pursued, it would essentially become by agreement with the club, and the payments would be incorporated into their annual lease payments to the city.
So it's done through you, Mayor, so it's done as part of lease negotiations. Are we in a lease negotiation or renegotiation phase at the moment?
Through you, Mayor Cole, no, there's the long-term lease for the club, but the payments or the repayments on that loan could be associated with their existing obligations. So additional payments back to the city to repay the capital cost of the installation of the solar panels.
So in future, I mean, if another club was to really come forward with this sort of concept, how would this be handled? What process would be in place for a club to be another club to be able to identify that this sort of loan might be an option for them?
Through you, Mayor Cole, we haven't been publicly advertising or promoting this. I think Perth Soccer Club is in a unique situation because they are financially sustainable and a very well managed club. So they are in a position to invest in upgrading to that facility, and then probably in a more they're in a stronger financial position than most of our other clubs and leaseholders.
Councillors, is anyone who hasn't spoken wish to speak, or are there any further questions? It's getting a bit of playback. Oh, Joe, can you please mute? Thank you. Councillor Hallett.
Just a quick one. I find this quite difficult. I'm deeply uncomfortable, though, about us pursuing something in the absence of some slightly more confirmed information. I just want to note that we do have a 3-month review of the budget. I certainly wholeheartedly support going ahead with this, but I feel like 3 months is okay to wait, particularly if this is something that we can firm up in far more detail and also pursue potentially with other buildings as well. Yeah, in the absence of that, I'm a bit uncomfortable despite our climate emergency.
I have to agree with you, Councillor Hallett. You're sort of sitting where I am, because I think that for me there's a couple of things. It's also about whether we've exhausted grants funding opportunities, and I don't feel 100% confident around that. We don't, by the sounds of this debate, we've been talking about this for quite some time now, have a self-sustaining loan process which is open and available to our community groups. And I think also the principle around solar PV for this particular budget in these circumstances was that it was to be where the City of Vincent would reap savings in power. And as we know, when you pay off solar PV for the City of Vincent, those savings then continue beyond the payback of the panels into ongoing power bill savings. So it goes extra further. So I feel for Perth Soccer Club because I think they've obviously been through a process and are very excited, and I think that's commendable. I think we really do need to just step back and commend our, community groups and sporting clubs when they want to take these steps. But I think it sounds like the comfort level right now around process is not there, and I would have to agree with Councillor Hallett that I think Q1 review is not too far away, and I will support the amendment. Is there any last questions or anyone wishing to speak? Okay, I'll put the amendment. All those in favour? All those against? Councillor Loden voting against, and I declare the amendment carried. I believe that may conclude the amendments. No, there's one more. A grey. Oh, my apologies. There is, and this doesn't preclude, there couldn't be amendments from the floor, but we have a grey. Is there a mover? Councillor Gontaszewski, seconded Councillor Castle. I'm now checking the screen.
Look, I feel a little bit like Grinch Gontaszewski. So my apologies. This is not, I've certain views about process, and despite a pandemic, I'm unwilling to yield. So this recommendation just relates to removing some more capital works, upgrade works from the Loftus Community Centre toilets from this budget, so that we can allow the works to be fully scoped and costed. I'm going to ask some questions later about other works, but I believe that this was a project that was potentially going to be included in a larger project that was not able to come together in terms of a successful business case. However, in the absence of that larger budget allocation, this $50,000 to upgrade the toilets has been proposed, but I'm proposing that be removed at this stage so that the works that are required can be assessed, scoped and costed to confirm their necessity and their costs. I do appreciate that we have facilities that do need to be upgraded from an accessibility point of view. But again, I'd prefer that we go through the process to actually get to a point where we have a strong understanding of what's required before we commit funds.
Seconder.
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, thank you. I support this amendment. I think it does have to be said those toilets are pretty dire and they do require an upgrade, not for many reasons, including accessibility, I understand. But I agree. I think that given the landscape of this particular budget and how pared back that is, I would be more comfortable including this line item once we have more detail about the actual cost. And it can, I'd be more than happy to consider it at any of our budget reviews for the rest of the year.
Councillors, comments? I would love to see these toilets upgraded, but I think that when the administration's comment says that so the city can accurately scope and cost in their response, it's very hard to not support this amendment. So I'm supporting this on the basis of process, but I do support the idea of the upgrade of the toilets, and I hope this is another one we can address at Q1 review. Any further comments? Okay, I'll put it. All those in favour of the amendment? All those against? Councillor Fotakis, I'm just not sure which way you're voting. Were you voting for or against?
I was actually trying to make a comment, but that's okay. I'm voting for.
Oh, sorry. Well, look, I'll...
Okay, Dan and I are in the birds by ourselves.
No, I'm struggling. I'm not even getting your whole body on the screen, so it's a bit difficult.
Well, I can't see. Yeah, I can't see because when the amendments come up. But just noting that when you're going by Zoom, you're a bit colourblind to the colour of the amendments. So it does take a time before they come onto the screen to know which of these amendments we're speaking to. I did want to actually just make a couple of
Councillor
comments on
Fotakis,
the
I'm going to have to say, look, I've called it, so I'm going to have to. Do I have to go? I'll just take some governance advice because I had called the vote. Are you happy for further debate from a governance perspective?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I understand then if you've called the vote, we should carry on. We've also lost Councillor Fotakis from the screen.
All right, we've lost Councillor Fotakis. Okay, Councillor Fotakis, I have to, on a procedural meeting procedures process perspective, continue with the vote. I do apologise, but you still have the opportunity to vote for or against. So I was calling the vote. All those in favour of the amendment? That's unanimous. I declare it carried. We're back to the substantive. Councillor Gontaszewski.
I just have questions. My questions relate to the preparation of an asset management strategy. I asked questions last week I asked some questions over the week in relation to an amount of $70,000 that I had it in my head that was potentially allocated for an asset management strategy development, a project that I think is incredibly important. And I was advised that there was no funds allocated to an asset management strategy. And I just wanted to check that that was the case, because I've been back and reviewed the papers that were provided to the budget workshop of 30 June. And in the City of Vincent Corporate Business Plan review, and also in the annual CBP, the draft annual CBP review for, what are they called? Strategic projects. There is a reference to developing a financially sustainable strategic approach to city assets. It's considered to be a new initiative. It is operating. It is noted as being an additional cost with an amount of $70,000 allocated in the 2021 financial year. And under the comments, it says $70,000 budgeted in OPEX, and that's highlighted in yellow. And I just wanted to check, given this information and given that this was the information that I was provided as an elected member as part of the discussions in the lead up to this budget, how I'm meant to form the view that that there's not $70,000 in the operating budget, given the complexity of the budget and the amount of changes that we've had. But my question relates to confirmation of whether there is $70,000 budgeted in OPEX for this year for the development of an asset management strategy, particularly given that my understanding was that this would be work possibly that was going to have to be done externally, but discussions last week indicate it may be able to be undertaken in-house, which would remove the need for an additional budget. So, but then also after that confirmation, I would be really grateful for advice, potentially from the CEO as to, as a local government elected member, what I'm meant to base my decision making on when the papers that are provided to me in the last budget workshop before the budget is presented appear to be inaccurate, and whether that is problematic from the perspective of the budget going forward.
Through my call, I'll answer as best I can. So I'm the director responsible for producing an asset management strategy. I've not asked for operating money. I'm not aware that there's any money in the budget to engage someone externally to produce that plan. You're correct. We've had discussions about doing it in-house, and that's the intention. And that's my understanding. There is no money specifically. I think there's a little bit of confusion with the CBP as presented. My colleagues just put it in front of me. $70,000, I think, is someone's picked that up as an amount in the capital program for asset rationalisation. It's just that figure matches perfectly what we have for asset rationalisation. So I think that draft is incorrect, which we will need to sort out. So that's my understanding of the situation. But I've certainly never asked for the money as director, and I'm not aware that it's in the budget anywhere.
Does the CEO have any comment on relation to the draft CBP?
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, we, as a matter of course, during the last 3 months, if there's any discretionary expenditure on external consultants, for instance, that we could have reduced, then we certainly tried to preference conducting all that work in-house to reduce our overall consultants bill. I think that might be an error in the way it's been presented or described, because the $70,000 that was previously on operating expenditure or capital expenditure was essentially to help pay for the cost of removing 1 or 2 buildings over the course of each year. So it wasn't for a payment of a consultant to produce a document. It might have been confused with the intent to have that funding for demolition of buildings which are surplus to the city's requirements.
I'm just going to move on for a second and just want to talk about the library, what's it called? Counter upgrade. Once again, was part of a suite of projects where the business case was not considered to, at this stage be ready to approve. And I was of the understanding that some small works may be required to accommodate the staff that are already in situ in the library from a customer service point of view, and have been moved from the City of Vincent Administration building, which has, I guess, quite a bit of space to accommodate them.
Councillor Gontaszewska, just
there is a question.
Okay.
My question is, the amount of $50,000 has been proposed. To what extent has this been scoped and costed? I guess I'll just be conscious that it's a round figure and, it's not a small one. So I'd just really be interested to know what the level of detail that's been put into thinking about this has been able to get to.
Thanks, through you, Mayor Cole. There's been a long-standing view that the functionality of that library front counter could be improved. And I think we've previously flagged in the renewal budget a figure of around about $30,000 in previous years. That work hasn't been undertaken, but we have increased the functionality of that space in the library foyer to accommodate an extra 2 positions for customer service, so that previous estimate of $30,000 for an upgrade to the existing library front counter, we have increased to around about $50,000 to accommodate the increased function, which could include an expansion of the actual counter space. So it's the exact number would be subject to quotations and competitive bidding, but our view is that $50,000 would be able to suffice for those works.
And in light of the new works, that the criteria that we've been considering for our capital works program, like whether it's we're going to make savings or it's cheaper for us to do the work now, whether it's required for COVID, etc. Which of the criteria does this work fit under?
It's a long-standing item which we think we could deliver this financial year. It's something we've been considering in previous financial years.
I didn't actually get my question answered in relation to how much scoping had gone onto this, and that we've just taken out a project because we felt it perhaps hadn't been scoped, but you've advised that this project has potentially some long-standing components and the additional components in relation to the transfer of customer service. But I'd just be grateful for perhaps through the Executive Director of Infrastructure and Environment, whether the scoping has been able to occur for this project.
Yeah, through my call, I'll answer as best I can. I think the CEO is correct. There was an item in last year's budget now to renew the library counter. And I think the quote was $35,000 to do that work. We put that on hold. COVID came, we talked about a community hub. We didn't know what the outcome was going to be. So we put it on hold and we didn't do the work last financial year. We've now put customer services on the library counter as well. So we've done an estimate to increase the size of the counter, and there'll be associated electrical works, etc., of an additional 15,000. It's not a perfect figure, and but it's been scoped in the general sense based on our experience and our knowledge. So building upon the original estimate, which I think was 35,000, we've allowed an additional 15,000 to increase the size of the counter and do the associated things that we have to do.
Thank you, Executive Director. That does fit with my understanding of this long-standing project. I would have loved to have been able to make some more savings in this budget, but you've answered my question satisfactorily now, and I appreciate the response.
Councillors, I know it's been a marathon, but I just have one question that I wanted to ask on the public record. Could I please have confirmation that a business case will be presented to Council outlining all of the works associated with the $2.9 million renewal at Beatty Park Leisure Centre?
Through McCall, yes, that's correct.
Great, thank you. Any further comments, questions at this stage? I think everyone's spoken almost. Okay, well, this has been a very big decision for us all. I'm about to put the motion to adopt the 2020-21 annual budget. All those in favour? All those against? Councillor Loden is voting against. I declare the budget carried. Thank you very much, everyone. Okay, that's a milestone. All right, so moving on to 12.1, report and minutes of the Audit Committee meeting held on the 30th of June 2020. Moved Councillor Toppelberg, seconded Councillor Gontaszewski.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. I just wanted to highlight the matters that were, both matters that were raised during general business. And I did have them up in front of me, but mine. So it's on page 365 of the PDF, which is page 365 of the document. So page 15 of the minutes. And just note in particular both the contribution and the point of view that was provided by one of the community representatives on the committee, which was invaluable. There was some lengthy discussion about cybersecurity, which was of great value, but particularly the discussion in relation to the West Australian Public Sector Audit Committee Best Practice Guide and how that might apply to the City of Vincent. And I think that made for some good reading and some interesting points, and it will be good to get that reported back to the next Audit Committee meeting. But I think there, on the basis of the what's presented in that best practice guide and the discussion that was had, I think that there's some further changes coming. We certainly, whilst we felt that we've been leading in some of what we've done in terms of our engagement with external members, and I think we are the first local government in WA, or certainly Metro, to have an independent chair of our audit committee. But there's some, and I would hazard a guess, we'd likely be the only one that doesn't have the mayor or shire president sitting on the audit committee, which is, I think, a good representation of the role, and it's a separate role to the management of business of what the entity does. But be interesting to see what comes back from that, and then what comes through to council. I would imagine there'll be some proposed changes to the way in which the audit committee operates going forward.
Councillor Gontaszewski, you wish to speak to it? Are there any further comments on the audit committee? No. Okay, I'll put it. All those in favour? I declare the item carried unanimously. Okay. The next item is 12.3, appointment of elected members and community representatives to advisory groups. There is some discussion to happen confidentially. I just wondered if anyone wanted to have a public discussion about this item. Probably just for the public record, then I'm just noting some nominees from council for these groups received so far. Councillor Castle is leaving due to her financial interest. So for the Children and Young People Advisory Group, so far nominees are Councillor Castle and Councillor Smith. For Sustainability and Transport Advisory Group, have nominations from Councillor Loden and Councillor Hallett. And for Arts Advisory Group, have received nominations from Councillor Fotakis and Councillor Smith. This doesn't prohibit any other council members from putting forward a nomination, but we will come back to this item once we've had a discussion in confidential. So I'll put that to the back of the meeting when we'll also discuss 10.2. Okay, so 12.4, advertising of new lease of portion of the Beatty Park Leisure Centre to Beatty Park Physiotherapy Proprietary Limited. So moved Councillor Gontaszewski, seconded Councillor Toppelberg.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. Just a question in relation to, I guess, process and governance. The wording in item 4 relates to the wording that was approved by the COVID subcommittee. I just wanted to check whether, where it's written that council is authorised to amend the decision of another committee.
Through you, Mayor Cole, it's not in the terms of reference, but our view when we discussed internally was that as the committee comprises council members and the committee's role is to make decisions, obviously in line with the terms of reference, but council could then amend those decisions if it was reported back to council. So it was at our view that since this relates to the lease negotiations, it would be appropriate for council to consider this and to then amend the decision of the committee accordingly.
Thank you. I appreciate that response, but I fundamentally disagree with it. I don't like the idea of council setting up a committee to make decisions and then modifying decisions. I'm very happy if it's considered appropriate for council to make its own decision that, you know, much like things filtering down tiers of government, etc., would be considered to be, you know, overriding, etc. Or also probably equally happy for if council's delegated decision-making authority or supported a group to make decisions that we then make a separate decision rather than amending. However, I'm also not comfortable with the inclusion of the financial relief component within the lease consideration. And I would like to propose an amendment to remove item 4. And if I can get a seconder, I will happily speak to it.
Before we do that, I'll just go to the seconder to ask whether you wish to speak to the substantive motion.
I shall reserve my right. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Back to you, Councillor Gontaszewski.
Yes, look, I'd just like to propose an amendment to remove item 4 so that it just relates to the lease.
Councillor Toppelberg, you're seconding. Okay. Do you wish to speak further?
Yes, look, I just want to say that for the benefit of the public, but also for the council members that haven't had a chance to dial in while we've been having our COVID meetings, we have considered a number of, you know, financial relief items, and the committee has been quite consistent in its approach. We have not gone further necessarily than the current standards or policies in relation to how these relief for tenants are distributed. And we have only made these decisions on the basis of financial assessment. So I would prefer to remove this item, and then this could be considered at a COVID meeting or could be considered by council as a separate item. I don't, or, you know, potentially if could be held over and could, you know, come back as a financial incentive payment, etc., allocated to the lease rather than, you know, popping it in with the financial relief for tenants. I don't feel comfortable putting the two together, and so I can't support this without this amendment.
Councillor Toppelberg.
I'm a little bit less fussed because I think that the delegation is the delegation of the decision doesn't preclude the right to make a decision in relation to your tenant's obligations or otherwise. I think that the two are separate. The way it's worded maybe suggest that it is amending another entity's decision, but ultimately I think that it is at the absolute discretion, but on the principle of relief or rent relief doesn't directly necessarily relate to the proposed new lease. So I don't think it has a material impact by removing it. So for that reason, I'm prepared to support it.
Thank you, councillors. Councillor Castle.
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, I'm supportive of that amendment. I agree that I think it confuses issues to bundle this together with this lease. I also have concerns about the end of clause 4, noting that BP Physio will request no further financial assistance. It concerns me that we're trying to enshrine that into our decision when we really don't know what might occur. And the basis of these rent relief has always been through the COVID committee that we are dealing with the period from April to June, and that there would be further reviews following that. So I don't think it's appropriate to try, if that's what this is trying to do, try and lock the physio into no further financial assistance.
Thank you, councillors. Any further comments? Councillor Fotakis.
I've just got a question just with regards to consideration of the financial assistance, whether that's actually relevant to the consideration of the lease, separate to this being a decision that's already been made. I'm happy to respect that's being made by the COVID committee and not amend that, but just trying to get some understanding of why a decision for relief has been bound into a lease consideration.
Through you, Mayor Cole, as part of the lease negotiations, the physio considered the financial assistance that was awarded by the committee and requested that we don't defer that 30% portion. The reasoning was they'd rather pay any cost due up front, and then because the situation at Beatty Park was improving, they believed that no further financial assistance would be required. So they were happy to say we're not going to apply for any further financial assistance over this period, April to September, but would like the waiver of 30% to be applied for that whole 6-month period. So the committee previously approved a 3-month waiver, 3-month deferral. They don't want any amount to be deferred, and that just came up as part of our lease negotiations. So I think they were looking for certainty at this point. That's why they wanted it to be part of this council decision, but we can definitely go back to them and note that if the lease is approved, provide that.
Councillor Fotakis, we're just getting feedback. If you wouldn't mind muting when other people are speaking. Thank you.
And I'll just finish by saying we can discuss with the physio whether we go back to the committee to request that deferred amount is instead waived for the full period.
Thank you.
Councillors, any further debate on the amendment? Okay, I'll put it. All those in favour? That's unanimous. I declare it carried. We're back to, no, we've dealt with that. That wasn't, yes, we're back to the substantive. Is there any further comments on the substantive motion? Okay, I'll put the substantive motion. All those in favour? Declare that carried unanimously. Okay, the next item is 12.8, proposed transfer of Anzac Cottage to the National Trust of Western Australia. Just wait for Councillor Castle, who's just leaving the room on a financial interest. Councillor Toppelberg is moving, a seconder. Councillor Hallett.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. Just the CEO sent some advice at 5:30 this afternoon, which I just think it's pertinent to discuss. I note that the intent, I quickly read the advice, and that is essentially that the National Trust, hang on, I'll get the wording so that I'm giving it correct representation. The National Trust would not be able to provide any assurance about future maintenance costs of the cottage if the transfer proceeded. I think that given the importance of the cottage and the issues that surround it, I personally don't have any issue with supporting what's proposed in the recommendation, and I think that those matters can be dealt with during the or post the consultation period.
Can I just clarify? were you saying that the National Trust would not be able to provide any assurance?
The email that we
Because-
received
No,
from the
what
CEO.
that's actually saying is that
Oh, sorry, that the city would not be able.
the National Trust
sorry,
had indicated in their letter that they may seek some support for
Yep. Sorry.
any undiscovered maintenance issues, and the CEO has made that clear that what if the disposal transfer happened, that would not be something the city would provide, and that they would proceed on the basis of an independent structural engineer and assessment of the cottage so that everyone understood the condition of the cottage prior to any transfer.
Yeah, I guess my, without that being locked down in any agreement, my assumption, I'll ask it as a question to the CEO, is that following or as part of item 3, which is the report back to council on the outcome, that would include clarity for council at the decision point as to whether it would transfer, as to who would be responsible for the costs and what that financial impost would be. So as I say, I don't think that advice impacts the decision-making process. I just think that it's critical that at point 3, where we receive that information back, that we have the full financial picture and risk assessment.
Through Mayor Cole, yes, we can provide that advice. There has already been a building inspection by the National Trust with their heritage architect, and found the cottage to be in very good condition and well maintained. But we have discussed with the trust to provide absolute certainty and independent building inspection to guarantee the structural integrity and no outstanding or urgent maintenance issues.
Thank you. And a question: if understand there's the entry fees, if the city or we as individuals were of a view that that there could or should be a discount for people who tick certain boxes, whether it be local residents, whether it be people who have other attachment to the cottage for any reason, is that something that needs to be resolved via amendment here, or is that I'm happy to make a personal submission during the consultation process? But if there's a belief that that structure, or is that something that is fixed across all National Trust run properties throughout the state, and does the state have control over over that, or the National Trust have absolute control over it, or would we be able to, if there was a view of council that certain parties should receive a discounted entry, that something could be included in the license agreement, or however, or the turning over of the property to their trust?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I can clarify that when we report back to council, but my understanding is similar to council setting our fees and charges on an annual basis. The National Trust submits to the state government, and the state government approves their fees and charges for the year. They have various categories. I did discuss with the National Trust whether or not there would be some transition arrangements around that if the proposal proceeded to accommodate existing community groups, or there's a special rate, for instance, for school groups, and how that would work in practice. But we can provide that further information when we report back following the consultation.
Councillor Gontaszewski. Oh, no, sorry, I have to go to the second, which was Councillor. No comment. Can I just ask Councillor Topelberg, what you're seeking is a bit different from clause 3. I don't know whether you wanted to consider an amendment, but I just thought that I'll just ask that question. But if you like, I'll go to Councillor Gontaszewski.
Thank you. My question just relates to the public consultation. I note that there's no requirement to undertake consultation, and it's proposed that public notice would be provided through Social's website and local paper. I just wondered, because if there'd been any consideration to provision of a sign on site, so that the local community who may be, we're not going to let it drop. In this instance, I understand that we don't have an obligation to do that, but I thought perhaps the sign on site may provide good opportunity for engagement.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I agree. That's a very good suggestion. It's something we can do, and that would be probably one of the better ways to communicate a change being proposed to the neighbourhood and visitors.
Would there not be a consideration of a letter drop to the neighbours in this along Kalgoorlie Street?
Through you, Mayor Cole, the sign, I don't think that putting a sign on the site wouldn't preclude us also doing a letter drop. But I think there would be, it would be well known if we do have the sign up for 2 or 3 weeks, and we could put an information bulletin to the surrounding residents as well.
Councillors. Okay, look, I'll just comment that I do have attended Anzac Cottage on many occasions, and there is quite a high knowledge of what's going on at the cottage with the neighbours, and there are often neighbours at events. So I think that it would be a good step to write to the neighbours on Kalgoorlie Street, and I would hope that administration could do that. I just also thought that for the public record, because I did ask some questions at the briefing, and there has been some information provided to council members, as Councillor Topelberg referenced, and just to sort of give a quick summary that the city would not be able to give ongoing insurances to the trust that were over a sort of 3 to 5 year period of meeting unforeseen maintenance issues, and that the proposal is to deal with that through this structural engineer building assessment independent report from the outset, noting that there's been a verbal commitment for that information to be provided to council as part of the next report following consultation, and that the National Trust has advised that as a guide, with a like-for-like building, they tend to spend around $10,000 to $15,000 a year on maintenance, and they have included their statutory entry fees, which seem to be fixed. But I note the CEO is going to seek further information about that, and there has been that request to report that back too. So thank you for seeking that additional information. Are there any further comments or questions? Okay, I'll put it. All those in favour? Declare that carried unanimously. Okay, item 12.9, advertising of amended development on city-owned and managed land property. Councillor Gontaszewski moving, seconded by Councillor Hallett.
Thank you. I just had a quick question in relation to the wording of this, which I note is common across a number of recommendations, but just in terms of the recommendation states that council is approving the amended draft policy as at attachment 1, and then goes on to another couple of recommendations. And I just wanted to check if we approve the amended draft policy and then provide public notice and comments in the intervening 21 days, is the draft policy considered to be approved as a policy, or are we actually just approving the policy for the purpose of advertising?
Through you, Mayor Cole, in line with our current policy on policy adoption and review, council's just approving it for advertising at this stage.
And we don't need to specify that, because I noticed we haven't been, and I just wanted to be ultra, given that there's been quite reasonable amendments to this since it last was out. I just wanted to check.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I don't think we need to make any amendments to this recommendation, but we can consider this in future because we are reviewing that policy for review and adoption. So maybe after that, we'll revise our wording to make that clearer. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Hallett. Councillors, any questions or comment? Okay, I'll put the motion. All those, you're voting. Oh, right, you're ready to vote. Let's vote. All those in favour? Well, that's unanimous. Thank you. Okay, that leaves us with 10.2 and 12.3 to deal with under business items. So both have confidential attachments, but they are open session items. So I will ask for a mover and seconder for 10.2, which is tender 576 of 20, pavement profiling and supply and laying of hot mixed asphalt, appointment of successful tenderer. Moved Councillor Loden, seconded Councillor Castle. Councillor Loden, do you wish to speak to it in open session, or do you wish to go straight to your questions on the confidential attachments?
Maybe just go straight to confidential, otherwise I might trip myself up.
Okay, that will